There are several facts surrounding the issue of climate change. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases are gases that prevent heat energy, which is reflected from the sun onto Earth, from escaping back into outer space. The more greenhouse gases present in the atmosphere, the less heat energy that will be able to escape, and the hotter the Earth will be. Also, there is an increase in CO2 since industrialization. As humans have began burning fossil fuels, CO2 in the atmosphere has steadily increased. There are two sides to this climate change debate: the consensus view as well as the minority view. The consensus view argues that climate change is a result of CO2 increase. As CO2 increases, so will temperatures. They refer to CO2 as the control knob of Earth's climate. The minority view believes that climate change is a result of many factors, both natural and human, that result in an altered climate. Perhaps the most convincing piece of evidence for the minority view is the medieval warming period. This is a period of high temperatures prior to industrialization. There's evidence of this high temperature due to tree ring data from many regions, ice core analysis that show warmer temperatures, pollen records that indicate shifts in plant life, lake sediment analysis, historical accounts of warmer climates, and glacial retreat, as well as archaeological evidence that people were settled in places that are now covered in ice. The minority view uses the medieval warming period to demonstrate an oscillation in global temperatures, a natural oscillation as you see temperatures rising here and temperatures in industrialization lowering. However, the consensus view argues that the medieval warming period is not a real thing, or that it was simply a regional phenomenon. However, the IPCC used to credit the medieval warming period as a real climate change, and they have since gone back on their word and changed that. The consensus has no strong evidence against the medieval warming period. They simply avoid the topic and sweep it under the rug, and I believe this is very supportive of the minority view, who is presenting facts and data analysis, whereas the consensus view can only hide their tails and run. The models are a key aspect of the consensus view argument, and it is essential to the consensus view. The consensus view relies on government funding, which I believe fuels their bias. They receive billions of dollars from the government, and it is largely as a result of the models they produce to convince bureaucrats to fund their research and enact policy that will lessen the impact of CO2 on our climate. These models are tested. However, these models run hot as well as some running cold. These models do not take into account clouds, which the minority views as a large weakness, as a great weakness of this model, because clouds are essential in climate change as far as precipitation and fudge factors is another factor. It's another piece of evidence that the minority brings to the table. The consensus view has the issue, which is climate change, increased temperature, and they have the CO2. The minority view argues that the consensus view creates a compilation of fudge factors to combine increased CO2 levels with increased temperatures. As you see, these models have slight variations in them. However, the consensus view must produce these models in order to receive government funding. I believe that's a great bias for them, whereas a minority view is able to pick apart these models, and it's pretty evident that they're not very accurate because they've been wrong many times before, and they continue to be wrong. The hockey stick graph is a great piece of evidence for the consensus view, because You know, we see small temperatures, and then large increase in temperatures as industrialization comes into play. But we talked about earlier, the medieval warming period. Well, this graph does not account for the medieval warming period. Thank you, data mining and cherry picking data. So, Michael Mann created this graph. Ross McKittrick and Steve McIntyre saw this graph and realized, you know, this thing doesn't seem very accurate. Steve McIntyre was an expert in statistics, and he recognized this graph as an industrial consultant because he saw this graph often in business proposals to increase and garner funding. And ultimately, this is what Michael Mann was seeking to do. He was seeking to pass policy that would support consensus view ideology, and that's what he did. Mann, as a result, received death threats and, you know, experienced a lot of, you know, emotional pain as a result. However, he also experienced government funding and a lot of clout. The NRC report concluded that this graph and data was accurate and fully valid. However, it was evident that tree ring data from one region was used as an argument, was used in this data set, as well as temperature increase later on. So tree ring data was used, and then we switched to temperatures that showed this characteristic hockey stick. The consensus view can plot this graph up and be like, here, see, heat increase. So I believe that's a strong piece of evidence for them. However, I personally don't believe the graph is accurate. The people who supported this graph and published findings that supported this graph were pieces of the Mann clique. The Mann clique were friends of Michael Mann, people who had done research with Michael Mann and had relationships with him. So I believe that takes away the validity of this model. However, the consensus view, it's an easy piece of evidence for them. Pop this up, show this. If you show this to a crowd of people, they're not going to sit and think about cherry picking and data mining. Whereas the minority view has to pick this apart and explain, you know, actually, no, this isn't what it did. This is what it did. The medieval warming period was not including in this. And so it is a strong piece of evidence for the consensus, as it's easy to produce and show to the population. This is a common picture we see, polar bear on ice. This aid is going to help us in understanding how the consensus view uses emotional impact to fuel their ideology rather than scientific evidence. They show pictures of a polar bear stranded on an ice. They went over some hearts, and they convince others that, you know, this is an issue. However, in the 70s and 80s, there was a great decrease in global temperatures. They were very cold, and it was seeming like there was going to be an ice age. Whereas now we have ice melting, which is more of a which is a warmer temperature than it was because we came out of such a period of intense cold. However, the consensus view will continues to commonly use these emotional ties and these easy graphs like the hockey stick graph because it's easy to catch the attention of those who are less knowledgeable. And that's it.